Dear listeners, thank you for tuning into Well Woman today. This is an episode that I'm so thrilled to bring to you. It's rich in wisdom, rich in insight, the type that you just don't find in everyday conversations. And it's definitely not what you find in quick media culture. So take a moment, breathe, and perhaps make that cup of tea because, sisters, this episode is dedicated to you in your totality as women. It's for your ears to hear, your heart to feel, your mind to awaken to. Women's sexuality, as we age, I'm sure you'd all agree, it's so underexplored and is so often clouded by these outdated expectations and assumptions and stereotypes that we have had to contend with as women. And I feel like it just fails to reflect our depth, to meet us at our depth, fails to reflect our worth, our truth, and our potential for living with a wild, alive, and intelligent body. According to a 2024 study, women over the age of 50 make up more than a quarter of the global population. So we are all in this together. And whether you're in this age bracket or another, I really invite you to listen in and to enjoy and to just soak up all of the wisdom in this interview. So my guest today is Vasumati Hancock. She's a highly respected psychotherapist, counselor, psychologist. She works in the domain of women's health and wellness, and she has a deep interest in the psychological journey that we take as women. Many of us now, and I think we grow up, we grow older without the guidance of a wise woman. And, this is someone who's walked the path, who's done so in a very attuned way, and who has the emotional, curiosity and intelligence to understand the particular challenges, the highs and lows, the psychology behind our experiences and our behaviors and our feelings. And for whatever reason, we often find ourselves living quite separate lives to each other. For me, not having this wise woman in my life was partly because I lost my mother. I didn't have my grandmothers around. So for whatever reasons, we end up living these busy lives and sometimes just getting swept up in our busy days. And often we find ourselves being more of service to others than to ourselves. As you'll soon discover, Vasu possesses an abundance of wisdom and insight, which has been well honed down and refined with over 40 years of experience exploring, what it's like to be a woman walking through this lifetime. And she is our wise woman today. You might hear references to her work in couples therapy, her clear understanding of masculine female qualities, her work in counseling, women's groups, of course, tantra, meditation, and more. And just speaking from more of a personal perspective, I've known Vasu for a very long time. She's passionate, she's present, she's supportive, she loves a cup of tea. What's not to love? There was always something special about this woman, apart from her professional integrity, which she has in abundance, and her intelligence. She has a way with words and a way with expressing things, phenomena, dynamics, just the way that she describes things really resonates with me, and I think it will with you too. And she has this deep wisdom, and she's here for us as women. If there is a woman who will stand behind you and give you all of the support that you need and lift you, it's Vasu. So I feel really privileged, to have many incredible women in my life who've inspired me and been my stewards and my inspirations, and Vasu is definitely one of them. So I'm beyond delighted to share this with you. Let's just get to the interview. I hope you love it. Hello and welcome to Well Woman. It's Sue Lin, your hormone health coach, and thank you for tuning in. If you're looking for the latest advice on women's health, food, mood, tips, hacks, and all the hormone things, you've come to the right place. I hope you love this episode. Let's get to the show.
Hi, Sue Lin.
Hi, Vasu. Thank you so much for being with me today on Well Woman. So before we start today, because we're going to dive into a lot of things, woman's experience, woman's health, psychological aspects of having a lived experience as a woman, I thought it might be nice just to get a sense of a little bit about you. You have such a deep and wise perspective on what it is to be a woman and the particular challenges we face today. So before we dive into the interview, I wondered if you could just share with us what actually brought you to do the work that you do.
Good question. Okay. I think from very, very young, I've always been psychologically oriented. I just have been. And also, I grew up in a sort of colonial environment, but in an indigenous culture. I grew up in Africa. And at the time, I never realized how deeply it affected me until I got away from it. And I realized that I absorbed a lot from that culture. And I would call it a nanny. Right now, that's a terrible thing to say, but there was real love. And I really understood what love really was from this person who basically looked after me and my brother and sister. And we kept in contact for years. And there was something about femininity, not in the sense how we see femininity, but a more earthy womanhood, deeply connected to the body, completely not connected to some image of objectification, but embodying so many amazing aspects of womanhood and earthiness and deep intelligence and love. And it affected me. And also, I grew up in a very difficult time. I grew up in apartheid, and there was a time, of course, that you could not but look at yourself. I mean, I went to university right in the peak of it. And so having to look at yourself, having a kind of social consciousness was normalized. And also, I studied anthropology. I studied indigenous people. I understood the rituals, the way indigenous people live more connected to nature and all its cycles. And it gave me something. It really did give me something. And I'm so grateful that even though it was a turbulent time and at times painful, and even now, I mean, I feel ashamed of my colonial past, I can only say that I learned a lot that has benefited me. And that sort of, because I studied religion, primitive religion, it was a natural understanding of a spirituality that was rooted in a very deep indigenous wisdom. And it really gave me a sense of the universe, of the power of nature, of being in touch with nature. So I didn't grow up sort of a disembodied little kid on my phone all the time. I grew up really in a wild place, very wild.
Yeah, so you grew up in Africa, correct?
I did. Yeah, I did.
I was reading about the West African queens, and this is okay, you could definitely tell me more about this, but the reason why I was reading about it was I was looking at the roles that elder women had played and comparing indigenous culture to Western culture, which is what I know. If I come from a place of knowing, I know that once a woman passes her fertile years, there's a shift in opinions, perspectives, and characterizations of women at that age. In fact, there's an invisibility cloak that seems to come on. And so that's amazing that you've been able to bring the wisdom from that culture, which is so rich,
Well, I
and
got it
weave that.
secondhand, but I did get it. And because it was
Mm.
all around us, and I preferred to be with the black people and the white people. I was more comfortable. But I think, Australia also has this amazing indigenous wisdom. Look at the art, look at, and it's so important, I think, as a woman to value your ancestry, your whether it's indigenous or whatever your ancestry is, because so much power passes through the ancestral line. Of course, so much trauma also does, but it's not only trauma. And because
Mm.
so many of us leave our families, we don't live connected lives. We live quite disconnected lives. And I think for women, that alienation starts to hurt at some point, and the loneliness or the compensation for that loneliness takes its toll on us. And I think this is the modern world because people move around, they disconnect from their families, maybe sometimes they come back. But I do think that family and lineage and ancestry has to be honored. You don't have to cling to it in a terrible way, in a negative bonding, but it has to be acknowledged. That's important for me. So, yeah, then I started studying psychology at that time, which was really interesting. Eastern religion and philosophy had started to, it was the 70s. Suddenly we were doing yoga. The Beatles were meditating. We went to India. And it was a very interesting time. So I did all of that. And, but I always valued being a woman. I got a good message from my mother on some level about femininity. Of course, culturally, not so great because I I was given the culture that men are the most important and women have to, basically kowtow to their men, which of course I wasn't very good at. But in general, I got a good message of femininity from my mom. And I've always loved people. I've always really been interested in people's inner world.
Mm. Mm. And in terms of your work with women and running women's groups and being very curious about the woman's experience through life, um, tell me about some of the things that attracts you to working with women specifically.
It's interesting. I was always more interested in working with relationships. And in my under 50 years, I was always much more focused with men. But after menopause, I began to be much more fascinated by the inner world of women and finding it so interesting and enriching and nourishing. And also my connections with women, because once you're
Mm.
out of the competitive stage with women, women become the most amazing ally, the most amazing friendships. And I value that. And then I started to do more work with women because I was seeing in our societies that women weren't really getting the space or the support that they really needed to flower psychologically and also
Mhm.
spiritually. I felt that women had not been fully valued, fully seen. And that wasn't about equality. It was about their individuality. It wasn't about, well, are we equal to men? Do we
Mhm.
get the same recognition as men? Do we get equal pay? On that level of gender politics, I wasn't that interested. I was interested more in women's creativity, in their power to heal, in the ability of a woman to bring so much wisdom and so much intelligence. And I wanted to support that because I didn't feel that there was, we pay lip service to how beautiful women are and how important they are. But actually, in fact, I didn't feel that that was happening. And I was also seeing it in relationships that if a woman didn't feel like she could fully express herself on all the different levels that were available to her, she would move into a more difficult part of herself, either shut down or angry or get sick or feel resentful. And I from really needing to support relationships that healed, I came to understand that if women weren't happy, you weren't going to have happy relationships.
Mm.
Women had a lot to offer in terms of relationship insight and wisdom and capability if they were listened to or entrusted as the guardian of the relationship. Women can be the guardian of the family, but they're actually the guardian of the relationship. That doesn't mean to disempower or limit the power of what men bring. I've never been that kind of woman that doesn't like men. I really do, always have. But to find not the balance, but the right way of holding those two polarities. Because it's not just about the woman as a gender-based person. It's about bringing in the feminine, and that can happen in a male body or in a female body. It's not only the domain of a female body. And I started to feel this is what we want to bring forth because this is where real intimacy happens.
Mm.
And that men have
Mm.
to embrace without shame, without fear, their feminine side. And I think men are more and more. So that's a little introduction.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. So my question to you, let's get into these questions, is considering um, considering how women might move through life, and we have these particular roles that we might be playing, or we might have markers that define us. I am a woman because, and including things like because I am feminine, and so on. Considering all of that, we reach this transition point in midlife and we start to change, and whether we like it or not, our bodies begin the process. So our bodies already with this attunement know that it's a great power for women to change, time for the transformation to begin. And when we were talking about this before, you mentioned something about becoming more visible to ourselves as women. And I thought, could you elaborate on that? Because it's such an important thing with that transition to not just be relational with other people. I'm not, yes, I am a mother, a wife, etc., but I'm not just that. So it's not about me relating to other people. It's now about me becoming visible to myself. So can you talk a little bit more about, how this change in midlife could actually become a little bit of the impetus, the spark, the trigger for becoming more visible to ourselves?
Yeah, beautifully said. I would say that the change actually starts psychologically, and that the psychological and the physical go hand in hand. And I'd like to link it up to when we first have menses. Like the big first change that women go through is getting the period and their bodies changing. And it's a time of quite enormous vulnerability. And it's a time that needs to be navigated with a lot of support, generally from the older woman, because at that time, a woman begins to define herself in a different way. It's not just that her body changes, her consciousness changes. And it's particular for a woman because her body is now able to receive a child. And hopefully she doesn't at that age. But the levels of psychological change has not really been very well understood. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the same thing happens when your period stops. Because this change is defined by this phase of starting your period and ending your period. And just before you start to get your period, you start to go through a change of consciousness. You become aware of yourself in a different way. And it's so profound because it's physiological, it's psychological, and it's hormonal. And it really shows the power that our hormonal, our endocrine system has on our entire identity and well-being. So I
Mm.
see the midlife, the menopausal stage, actually starting at the puberty. It's one process, right? And it's
Mm.
often defined by sexuality, by desirability, by excitement, by feeling that you can go and get what you want by a certain kind of power that this sort of estrus gives you. And it's a wonderful power. And then as that starts to change, that same vulnerability that started your cycle, becoming a woman, beginning to be aware of, oh, I'm a woman now, I'm not a girl, I'm not a boy, starts again. And we run over it because it's threatening. All our self-worth issues start to become more active. And it's not only to the outer world, to men, it's looking at ourselves with judgmental eyes, saying, wow, I'm not as pretty. I've got my first wrinkles and my confidence is starting to go down. My body confidence is less. And it was very interesting how it happened for me. Around 47, I was still menstruating till 51 or 2, but around 47, I started to realize that I could no longer dress the way I wanted to dress. It just wasn't appropriate. I was trying to look younger than I was, and it made me feel like I was betraying myself on some level. So I went through a crisis because I didn't know how to dress. I didn't want to dress as an older woman, but I couldn't dress as a younger woman. And I just felt like, who am I? What am I now? And it took a long, long time to sort of feel like, oh, there's a different me that's emerging that isn't so sexy, isn't so capable of relying on a certain way of relating to the world and relating to men. I didn't have that anymore. And I felt insecure. I felt extremely, extremely vulnerable. And at the same time, what happened, which was also spooky, was I started to want to move more inward, to have more time to sit with myself, to be with myself, to understand myself. It was a time of, I think with my first years were more extroverted, and that started an introversion process. So then there's always this voice saying, well, isn't this a bit early to sort of retire from life? But it was organic. It's what I really wanted to do. So I had to fight with a lot of different voices. And it's quite hard. And there's not a lot of people who talk about it. It's always a shameful thing. It's almost as if menopause has become a shameful thing, but it's the most natural thing. And there's also this myth that when your menses stop, you no longer are a sexual person. Well, that is exactly not true. But the sexuality and the way your body opens or what your body needs are very, very different. And there's also a grief because I never had children. And I think for women who have children, maybe it's different, probably very different. But there's an enormous level of grief that comes up because, wow, I missed something that is so central to the feminine, to mother. I mean, I mother in my work and I mother in other ways, but that biological, actually bringing forth a child, I missed out on that. And I have enormous respect for women who have children. I don't just see it as, oh, it's a normal thing, women have children. It's something so profound. And I don't think women are honored nearly enough for it. It's sort of, this is something women do, but it's enormous. Raising a child, birthing a child. And I felt to honor women for mothering. It's a lot more than the soccer club and driving them to school. It's a huge process. And often that time of the 50s, if women, it's changing now because women have children later, but usually that menopausal time started to coincide with children growing older and needing that mothering relationship possibly a little bit less. So it's a very interesting time, but it isn't just menopause. It's a process that begins at puberty and completes a certain thing at menopause. And I found that really fascinating. And it's the vulnerability that comes up, the deep sense of I mean, insecurity if you cling to the old, and a vulnerability that can become more spiritual if you allow the process, if you trust the process, because it's the grand design. I mean, you can't stop it. I mean, you can take all kinds of hormones and do whatever you want, but it's not
Yeah.
actually going to change anything, as you well
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's so true. There's a lot in there to unpack. Let's go first to this idea of the shame that many women carry. I don't want to generalize and say that every woman has this, but it's a little bit in the psyche, I think.
I think it's in
The
the
shame of,
culture. It's in the culture.
yeah.
Our
Mm,
culture is very youth oriented, it's very thin oriented, it's very women are objectified. There's a certain stereotype that women try to aspire to because it's still about, in a sense, pleasing men. And I think what goes awry at that time is that the ability to do that successfully, because your body and your hormones are different, it just simply doesn't work as well. And you can either pretend or try to push over it, but it won't work. It just won't work.
mm, And as you say, I mean, it's the grand
I
design.
design.
There's
It's
there's no fighting nature.
no.
There was something that you said before also about women already possessing the wisdom to sort of turn this into a spiritual journey to, navigate through this. So, in terms of, you know, understanding that, gosh, there's a lot of cultural, societal expectations that I'm kind of living by that are just not achievable, and starting to look at ourselves and become a little bit more introspective, moving into the internal world.
Um,
Uh,
Here's a little piece extra, but please continue and then I'll fill in that extra piece so I don't lose it. I'll write it.
oh yes, um, this is really a. I was thinking before. This is a journey that ideally we would have a wise elder to steer us through, and we just don't, because even if I think about my family, we're in all different parts of Australia, or lots of people are spread throughout the world, so we don't really have that guide anymore. And I feel like we need to become our own wise women. So in terms of talking about this journey of how we become more introspective, how we start to look beyond being sexy or youthful or thin or pleasing to others, where would you start with that?
I would start with menstruation because in the old cultures, when women were menstruating, they had to be with women. Not, I mean, some cultures said, well, it's unclean, but I don't really think so. I think it's a time when women bathed in the woman's wisdom. They would have a tent and the woman would be together because menstruation is a time which also opens you up to different frequencies, to different inner spaces, to different level of intelligence. And it was a time where women stood with women. And it was a beautiful time because women could withdraw
Mm.
from the world of men and be with themselves and be for themselves. And that's been lost. So I think it doesn't just come at 50, it's been there all along if we had listened deeper. And because we haven't, there's a very interesting that happens thing in menopause is hot flashes. Maybe you know better than me, but I think most women have it. Not all, for sure, not all, but a lot do. And those hot flashes are sort of so powerful because when they are really hot. And it's a feeling of empowerment because it flushes your body. And there's also a lot of anger. And I think that's something we don't talk about, that at in those in that transition between your childbearing years and the years that follow, there's a cleansing. And that cleansing is anger that you've never been able to express at A lot of things. Maybe how you've mistreated yourself or how you've robbed yourself of so much of the things that you really wanted because you had to conform, or anger to family, or anger to partners, or anger to the whole culture. And that hot flashes is the allowing of the life force, the allowing of that anger, even rage sometimes. And it's healthy. And not to suppress it, because that's what paves the way for that new consciousness. It's like now I don't need to ABC, I can this, and I'm getting free. I don't have to. And I've done so much of what's been expected of me without asking myself, how do I feel about that? And do I have any boundaries about that? And and I think that's a really time when women start to say, well, what do I value? What do I want? What do I want to say? What's my voice? What are my needs? All this gets sort of concertinaed into that time because up until then, we've just gone along doing what we were expected to do and not questioning. Comes menopause, it's a new life. It really is an enormous transition, quite underestimated, I think. And there's a whole change. It's not only hormonal, not only physical, it's psychological. And you start to think about me. Suddenly, I become important. And often a lot of relationships start changing at this time because when you look at your consciousness and you start to be honest, you might realize, you know what? We're not meeting. This isn't the relationship I want to have. And a lot of courageous women, 50 years old, I'm on my way. I'm going to do different things.
The
New
gift of
creativity.
anger.
It's
Mm.
it's outrage, it's anger, it's a statement about me. I finally got a voice. I'm like roaring like a lion. I'm angry. These hot flashes are coming.
Oh.
I pat it away, put powder on, push it down. I mean, they're just, you know, and they're
Mm.
great. I finally started to welcome it. I saw it as well. A lot of old stuff is getting flushed out, and it's a new power. And I think we're not taught, we're not supported enough. I think
Mm.
women are really in touch with their intelligence, they get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I often think about the anger, irritability, frustration that comes with
That's it.
all those changes we're experiencing in midlife. Have that gift that allow us to put down a boundary or take space for ourselves or say
Precisely.
no, the power of no.
Yeah, all of that, the
Yeah.
boundaries, the space for yourself, and I think that keeps your body young. Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
You cannot go on in the same old rhythm.
Mm. And then also, when we're younger, we're taught that an angry woman isn't necessarily a good thing, or an angry
No,
girl
you're
is not a
told
good
actually it's
thing.
a horrible thing. She's a witch.
Yes, yes.
Italian, they
um,
say,
yeah.
"Strega."
Did
She's
you
bad.
know that the Mongolian word for menopause means cleansing?
I
That in
didn't, but
that
yeah, it
culture,
makes
that is,
sense.
yeah,
It
that
makes
is how they
sense.
think of it. And then the
Yeah,
final menstrual
cool and
bleed.
cleansing. That's such a powerful time
Mm,
before, during, and just after because it's also psychological.
so interesting.
And
Um,
I think if women fight it, they have difficult periods, painful periods. There's always a sense of resistance, and you have to ask, am I resisting what's natural? Am I resisting all those different phases? I mean, you could definitely talk about pregnancy and childbirth in ways I certainly cannot, but that has to be factored in because this is such an important part of our lives. Pregnancy, conception, childbirth, breastfeeding. Wow. So from menopause, from period to end of period, all the childbearing years as well.
mm,
Whew, quite something.
we
It,
are quite something.
yes, and I think it's different now because women have kids
Yes.
late. I mean, a lot of the women I work with are really only starting to, because they wanted to develop themselves and have career and have a profession. And then they get to close to
Mm.
40 and suddenly that question comes up. Am I going to have a child? And many people are choosing not to. And I guess it's a personal choice. Um, but it is happening more and more that people are saying, I don't need that to fulfill myself.
Mm.
Or if you have children later, then by the time you're menopausal, those children are teens, they still need you.
Yes. And then there's the a lot of
You've got
my
parents to look after at the
clientele,
same time.
yes, parents and kids at the same time. And where do we find the time for ourselves? But one of the things I wanted to ask you relating to your upbringing was, I mean, you've had the experience of indigenous cultures and women and femininity in those cultures. So, what could we learn as Western women, assuming that most of the listeners will be of a Western sort of living style? What can we learn from indigenous or non-Western uh, cultures about how to value ourselves as we become elder women?
Well, the beauty of indigenous cultures are they are not designed to have a certain self-image. They don't need it. And because older people are valued in indigenous cultures, as ancestors, as elders, as the wise people. There isn't this desperate hanging on to youth and, a chemical procedure here and a surgical procedure there and something here, which takes you away from something deeper. And I think it's very difficult in our culture because it's not only a beauty focused culture, it's a youth focused culture. I'm And that's so sad because we're all aging. We're all going to age. Our bodies are going to age. And it makes me sad because we don't value that process. We actually terrified of it. And I think that's where we go wrong. It's not only about trying to look beautiful, it's and getting our value as women from that, but it's fighting what's natural because then we don't stay deep enough in our intelligence, in our depth, our wisdom, our capacity to perceive, our incredible imagination, um, our psychological complexity. All these things are very, very rich. But if you're just desperately trying to stay young because you've got these internalized negative voices telling you that you're not good enough. These very shaming voices that we've internalized from the culture, which don't allow us to find the silence and the quiet to just go, wow, I'm going through something internal that's really quite magnificent. It's a matter of not valuing what's real, what's organic. And indigenous people don't have that. They don't have a beauty myth. They don't have a fear of aging. In fact, they don't have any of that. It's not a whole thing on self-image, the look and, style. They just
Mm.
don't have that. But I have to say, I wasn't raised in indigenous culture. I was raised next to it. I have to, sadly, honor my colonial past. But I do value what I saw and what I gleaned from it, which was immense. And the level of celebration and freedom in the body and expression, the level of insecurity that Western women grow up with, constantly second guessing themselves. Am I good enough? Am I beautiful enough? It's just not there. It's just not
Mm.
there. And the
Mm.
whole idea of thinness, not most women are not thin. Some are, but what's the fun of starving yourself just to be what you're not?
And so much of it is genetics. And I mean,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
in your work, when you see a room full of women laughing and feeling so comfortable with who they are that they can dance and just be whoever and do whatever in the moment, I mean, that must be extremely rewarding for you?
I had to work on that because I grew up also with a lot of self-criticism. Um, I'm not naturally thin, I'm not naturally tall, and I'm not blonde. And I'd wanted to be all of those things. And so I always felt a little insecure about myself. And unfortunately, therapy, starting to really find my true power, my true expression, it helped me. I had to go through a lot because I had internalized a lot of judgment and criticism about the way I looked. My parents were not very kind, and I had to work very hard to overcome my insecurity that I wasn't pretty, that I wasn't desirable. I had all the stuff to work through, that I had an eating disorder when I was younger. That was a result of trying to, I think we suffer so much. And I work with a lot of people with tremendous eating disorders, tremendous. I've helped so many women with it because this comes out of this toxic culture, toxic shaming culture that doesn't allow women to really develop who they are, the way they are. And I had to deal with
Mm.
that in my 20s. Horrible things. And then, of course, finding relationships when you carry a lot of shame about yourself. I mean, I was dealing a lot with abandonment and the fear of abandonment. I mean, it didn't come easy. I had to work it. But then later, as I got older, I started to appreciate myself more, not for how I looked, but for how I was living my life. Wasn't always good, made some major mistakes, but could learn from it. And then later years, integrity and integration became more important to me. So yeah, no, women have to go through a lot of stuff. This is not an easy culture for women. Not easy.
Mm.
It doesn't
Mm-mm.
value women being their true selves.
And this sounds a lot like the moving from being in the external person to the internal person. Um, can you talk a little bit about the importance of building that inner knowledge, or something I think you've described before as the inner repose?
I think, women earn that the hard way. I think this comes through breakups, I have to say. We don't willingly go to that place. Often life just kicks you there. There's a death of a parent, a death of a
Mm.
child, a loss of a relationship. I think grief and loss are a huge thing that shapes the feminine soul. Life's not a picnic. I mean, I lost my father very young. I know very deep friends of mine who've lost children. I mean, I can't even imagine the grief. I can't even imagine the
Mm.
grief. Or people who can't have children. So this turning to yourself comes through life's challenges. It doesn't come through a self-help book. It comes when you have children who have problems or parents who you have to look after. It's life. Life dishes it out to you. And that's what it's like, the friction that builds the pearl. It's inner friction that you develop. And every relationship pushes you to develop your relationship with family, with partners, with parents. Most of us come through our lives with so much unresolved material about our family of origin. I mean, your partner does that work. And it is work. It doesn't just, we have to
Mm.
work it. And it's painful. It's a birthing process. So I feel that that how you find yourself isn't through, okay, one day you do a yoga class and suddenly you land in samadhi. It's life throws you a lot of curveballs.
Mm.
Betrayals, women who find out their partner's been not telling them the truth, or women who've betraying their partners because they're not getting their needs met. Life is messy. It's messy. And then divorces are terrible things, but they
Mm.
happen. Nobody wants it. A family breaks up. Is that nice? No, but it happens. So I think women find that through going through the fire of life.
Mm.
It's fire. It's a
Yeah.
baptism by fire. You
Mm.
know,
So
we
interesting.
When you lose a partner or your parent dies young and you're not ready for it, you lose a child, something happens. I mean,
Mm.
like, these are so enormous things, and they throw you back to yourself. And they
Mm.
throw you back to a fundamental truth that you're alone, that you're actually all these things. This is the illusory world. You're alone. You got to embrace that. And that's where you gain strength. You can have so many things, but you can't take it for granted. You know that. I know that. You lost parents. I lost parents. Craig lost parents. We lose people we love, and it's so painful.
Mm.
It's painful. But that's where we grow if we handle it right.
It's like an alchemy, isn't it?
It is.
Even menopause, and we're letting go of
Yes,
the
yes, yes,
person we
exactly.
were.
Menopause is grieving.
Yeah.
It's grieving
Mm.
your old self. And for those of us who weren't fortunate or didn't choose to be parents, you grieve your loss of fertility. You grieve. The
Mm.
womb grieves. In ancient traditions, the womb is considered the seat of power. It's not the brain, it's the womb. And the womb is always powerful, even if you haven't had a child, because it's the seat of creativity. And even if you have a
Mm.
hysterectomy, which unfortunately a lot of women have to do, but the psychological, psychic womb is still always there. And that only you find by going in and finding that mysterious power.
Mm.
It's the womb, it's woman. A man doesn't have it.
Yes.
It's woman. It's the relation to the womb, to your creativity. Now, sometimes that creativity wonderfully expresses in making a baby, making a child, but sometimes it expresses in other ways. And that's what I love about womanhood. It's pure creativity if you can listen to yourself.
Mm. Mm. I 100% agree with you there that we're bringing something forth into the world. That is our creation.
And
Um,
power, Celine, that's also our power. I mean,
mm.
birthing a baby? Are you kidding?
It's a big thing for the body
It's a big
and the
thing.
soul.
Yes, I think.
Oh, it's interesting how the we've talked so much about the psychological journey, and then I'm interested to know how you think that intersects with a woman's health,
Oh,
and with her physical health.
oh. I think that's the beauty is that you don't split it. Your psychological health and your physical health, they're one, the mind and the body, the emotions,
Mm.
they're all so connected. And I think that if you repress yourself, deny yourself, don't listen to yourself, don't treat yourself well, it will show up in some kind of physical ailment sooner or later. Now, that's not really true
Mm.
because I know people who've got cancer who've lived incredibly healthy lives. So you can't say it's a given. But I think loving yourself, taking care of yourself, being present to looking after yourself and valuing yourself will, in the long run, give you a better run on life and give you a better quality of life, even if it isn't a long life. We have genetics. Genetics have their own story.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, genetics has its own program, like it or not. But if not on genetics, we can support ourselves. For a
Mm.
woman who takes care of her body, who eats the way her body wants to eat, who exercises the way her body wants to exercise, will have better well-being. And well-being, I think, goes a long way to physical health. What do you think? I think you know it better than me.
Mm. I feel like there's a emotionality to our bodies that sometimes we overlook because, at least with the work that I do, it's very health, physical body focused. But having been kind of in this beautiful world of self evolution that you are in and Craig is in, and the Hoffman process, women's groups, all that stuff, I don't see them. I don't see them as a dichotomy. Like I feel like the psychological self needs to evolve just as much as the physical body,
Evolve
and
and heal.
yes,
Yeah.
and heal, yes, and also just to be curious about both rather than fixating on one, because I feel like there is a tendency in the West to become really fixated on the physical body and use that as a marker of well-being. So, am I fit enough? Am I slim enough? Have I got muscles enough? And when that starts directing all of our decision making, it's almost like a bypassing of that spiritual journey that I feel we were all designed to make at some point. And there was a term that Craig used to use called the macroneurotic. Because we had this cafe supermarket up the road.
I remember going in buy rice balls. They were really good.
Yeah. And so he'd see these particular types. He'd say, "Oh, we're going into macro. We're going into macro. They're a bit macroneurotic." Oh, sorry, yeah, just to kind of too obsessed with the health aspect of it all, the physical health. It's interesting because of the work he does is
So
to
funny.
explore
That's
so much deeper than the surface layers. So these, yeah, macroneurotic types. Anyway, I always found that really funny. But where I notice it is in social media now or in the news, where I feel there is that neurotic fixation on physical health. And
yes.
maybe sometimes too much love and light, whereas I feel like the work that you're talking about, it's like in this big bowl of, as you say, messiness. It's with all of the challenges that have happened and we've had to kind of fight our way through them. And sometimes we're really confused. Sometimes we're depressed. Sometimes we're angry. And while all that's happening, the body and the body systems is doing its own thing to work through that emotionality as well. And the system that I often focus a lot on when I work with women in midlife is the liver, because the liver is a seat of emotion. And I think that's why when we go through each monthly cycle, the liver is preparing the blood, filtering it, feeding it to the uterus, and then we get the flow of blood. Or sometimes we don't, and we get stagnation, holding, constriction, contraction, we get pain. Sometimes we get angry, hot, whatever the symptoms might be that we call PMS. So I feel like there's always going to be that emotionality in the body, finding a way to express itself. And yeah, I agree with you that when the two come together and we're working with both of them, there's an alchemy there. There'll be a transformation of something that was previously not resolved, not complete, but it will go through the processes. And at the end of it, we'll be okay. We'll come out okay.
Good. This is great because it just brings me to something else. What people need is community, and what people often don't have is community. I think what I work with in women and what I think really takes a toll on their health is something we call stress, where you're just running too fast, you're not paying attention to yourself, you don't get enough rest, you're high on caffeine to keep going, going, going. You do alcohol to come down, and your whole system is just out. So stress leads to exhaustion. Exhaustion leads to depression. And what I find is that the quality of people's intimacy, intimacy and sexuality are really important regulators of a relationship and of our system. But then people are too exhausted to make love or to really be intimate. They're too busy, they're too stressed. And so relationship quality really goes down. And I think that hurts women. I think women really need love and closeness and nourishment through a deeper meeting with a partner. And people are finding it so difficult because, firstly, everyone has to make money. You have to work all the time. Americans work, work, work. And then it's sort of you compensate for the exhaustion and the stress through materialism, but it's not ever really going to fulfill you because what you want is intimacy, communality, a feeling of belonging, a feeling of closeness. And I think that's where things really go awry. And I go to China very often, and I mean, the older Chinese, every morning We're out in the square and we're doing our qigong and we're doing tai chi, and they laugh like hell because I do it so badly, but they're so welcoming. And there's the spirit of togetherness, and this really focus on eating well and sleeping enough. In certain cultures, that's very basic, but we've lost it. You don't see
Mm.
the Chinese tanking up on coffee, and their bodies are beautiful. There's an ancient wisdom, and I love that. I really love going there because I start to, you know, move different, think different. I'm not talking about modern China, but the old Taoism, which is there's a resurgence of it now, the really old Taoism that the younger people are now going back and learning the Taoist movements. And they're so beautiful and they're so intelligent. And there's such a wise understanding of the body system connected to the universal system. We're not just these separate little, egos running around. So, and you look at the older people there and they're treasured. They're
Mm.
treasured. They're not sort of discards. I think it's so painful for women when we get to a certain age and we don't have body confidence, and either we gain weight or we gain wrinkles or something happens. I'm 74 now and I don't worry about it anymore. But in my 50s, I was anxious. And I look back and I think, why did I worry so much? Because I wasn't being seen. I remember the days when I'd walk down the street and guys would look at me. And I remember the days suddenly when no one saw me. I was like simply invisible. And now I laugh about it, but then it was not a laughing matter.
Mm. So many women will relate to what you're saying,
I hope they can laugh about it because
Yeah.
at that point, you have to see yourself. You have to become visible to yourself because, yeah, it is going to be, estrogen makes women beautiful. When estrogen goes down, your glow goes away. And guys are tuned to estrogen. It's that
Yes.
hormone. When that's less, you get that beautiful tire around the middle that is extremely stubborn. No matter what you do, it doesn't go away. And it's funny. It's really hilarious.
Yeah, so true. And it's really also very interesting what you're saying about the intimacy. We do need that intimacy and connection to feel loved and seen, especially by the people, our family, our partners,
Yes.
whoever we're with, by the people that we're with and we value. We want to be loved and seen by them. Before we wrap up today, just one final question. Uh, how would you say that women could start to open maybe to a different type of intimacy as we get older? Because the old ways, in terms of being sexual beings and so on, that shifts, doesn't it? That sense of sexuality might become sensuality, or it just has a different form. It's more kind, more gentle. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Look, I think that's 100% true. I think women's sexuality changes. It becomes more slow. It becomes less urgent, and you need to take time, and it's more delicate. Um, it feels deeper. It's not so, it's not so exciting, but it's more refined. In fact, it's in many ways more beautiful. And it doesn't go away. And I think it is still important, even though you might not feel that desire as you used to, that hormonal desire, to make it still important to connect to a partner with sensuality, with physicality, because it keeps the heart open and it keeps the kindness and the consideration flowing. So many people who don't have that end up feeling lonely, alone in their relationship. And I think it's always important to just keep that element alive, even if it isn't what it used to be, that it's more tender, that it's just different. It is different. And women have to find out, how is it different? What do they need? How do they express themselves? And communicate it kindly to men, because men may not understand. But I do
Mm.
believe that men were very receptive Because as long as they don't feel like they're going to get, ignored and their needs are going to be dismissed, then I think they're also willing to change how we express ourselves in intimacy. I don't believe that men are holding on to the old style, but they don't want to feel like, well, now they know they're not anymore. Their needs are no longer important. And I think that's where there's a whole new shift of caring and tenderness and consideration and kindness and friendliness that is nourishing, and we can't miss it. But if we're too exhausted and too stressed, we will not find the time for it. So stress, exhaustion, pushing yourself too hard, that's got to be examined. Because you'll have adrenal fatigue, you'll be burned out. So many people have burnout. Exhaustion. I have people who are so exhausted and they're young. So that's what I say. Slow down. Take care of yourself. Take care of your body. Take care of your spirit. Take care of your heart. And move into life with a gentleness and a respectfulness.
Those are beautiful words. Yeah. And, particularly coming from you, because everything that you do is with integrity and love, and, you can hold a space. So thank you, Vasu, for being with us.
Is that I think it's very nice when you get older that you're not driven by your hormones, because when I was driven by my hormones, I made mistakes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And, there's more time to consider things. It's actually kind of a relief.
Gosh, that's a really great way of looking at it. We're all a bit hormone centric.
We're hormone centric, and it's a certain type of hormone centric.
Oh.
Good, Susan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vasu.
Thank you for the work you do.
And thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And it's been wonderful to have this time to dive in deep with you. Thank you for listening to the Well Woman podcast. The information, opinions, and advice in this podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice, and it's for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not always be those of the host. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon in another episode of Well Woman.